one of the owners of the cinema. I really just came here to welcome you. I'm told by Joyce that this is, and we confirmed it with Peter, confirm it with Shayna. This is the first time the Lit Fest has been at Cinema Salem. We trust it will not be the last. The reason we were so delighted to have you here is that we want groups from the community to think of this as a place they can come to do what they want to do. So this use on this stage, possibly down in the future, we'll be doing hybrids where book clubs will see films. So we're experimenting. We're delighted to welcome you here, and we trust the next 3 days will be a great deal of fun and very satisfying for people who actually read, which of course is we want to discourage that because we're a cinema. Joyce, the rest of the evening is yours.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Marshall. Yeah, we've been talking about at the Athenaeum about a way to collaborate with Cinema Salem for over a year. So we're really happy to be here tonight. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us for the kickoff of the 13th Salem Literary Festival, aka the Lit Fest. I'm Joyce Maroney. I'm the president of the Board of Trustees at the Salem Athenaeum. I'm also, which is the presenting sponsor of the Literary Festival, and I'm also a member of the 10-person committee that spends a good part of a year putting this festival together. Half of us are currently down and out with COVID, so you will see the Lit Fest volunteers masking up tonight, but the rest of you are free to do as you see fit. Again, we're just trying to protect ourselves so we get through the weekend. A special thanks to our volunteers. It's a lot of work to assemble the great authors worldwide that we do every year. We are partnering again this year with the Salem Public Library for our children's programming on Saturday morning. We have a special event on the Salem Common tomorrow night that, with or without your dogs, you are welcome to attend. It's a book, an author talk and reading with Jenna Blum and Elena Dillon, and we're really looking forward to that. Free treats from New England Dog Biscuit. Before we begin, and this year for the first time also, we will be having mass poetry join us on Saturday. Saturday will be live adult programming all day at the Salem 5 Community Room. And so we will have author talks, author readings all day, as well as a couple of segments of poetry with mass poetry. Before we begin tonight's program, here at Cinema Salem, we would like to respectfully acknowledge that Salem is on the ancestral territory of Indigenous people. This land is Namkeg, or fishing place, where generations of Indigenous people lived and passed through for centuries. From the village upon the Namkeg River, now known as the North River, to, I'm going to get this right, I hope, Sekum-Nana-Pashamet's fortification, now known as Castle Hill. The people of Namkeg farmed, fished, traded, raised their families, discovered and invented, created art, and above all else, honored the land upon which we all stand today. We acknowledge that this is Indigenous land and also acknowledge the Massachusetts tribe who continue to honor and hold this land into the present. Now for our program tonight. I'm very pleased to announce the 2 sessions we'll be doing tonight. We'll begin with a conversation between authors Alix Harrow and Olivie Blake. This session is being conducted live here, conducted virtually on Zoom, and will be broadcast to us here in the theater. After a short break, to give us a chance to set up the stage a little differently, and a chance for you all to buy concessions from the theater, hopefully, and make some donations to the Salem Lit Fest if you see fit. We will commence our 5-minute lit readings, and that portion of tonight's program will be live here and broadcast via Zoom to the virtual audience. We have had one change in terms of our presenters tonight. Our moderator was going to be Brunonia Barry, who some of you may know, the lace reader. She unfortunately is unable to attend because of illness. So I will introduce the authors on her behalf. And so tonight, we will be joined by Olivie Blake. She is a New York Times bestselling author of The Atlas Six and The Atlas Paradox. As Alexine Farrell Folmuth, I think I got that right. She is also the author of the young adult rom-com My Mechanical Romance. She lives in Los Angeles with her husband, new baby, and rescue pit bull. Find her at olivieblake.com. Our other speaker tonight is a former academic and adjunct, Alix Harrow. She is a New York Times bestselling and Hugo Award-winning writer living in Virginia with her husband and their two semi-feral kids. She is the author of The 10,000 Doors of January, The Once and Future Witches, and various short fiction. Alix and Olivie will be taking your questions on Zoom for those of you who are virtual, and we will pass on any audience questions here in the theater to our moderator, Carolyn McGuire, and we will get the questions from the room answered that way. So I'm going to step down, Carolyn. I think my work here is done.
Mm-hmm.
I think we must be on.
Yeah, I think we're alone now. Okay.
Well, I'm going to steal the first line and just say thank you so much to the Salem Lit Fest. This is very exciting. I am thrilled that I am not there to see my face at the scale that it currently is. But I'm really thankful to the Salem Lit staff and to Carolyn and Brew and Lauren for setting all this up. This is wonderful because now I get to talk to Olivie, who is someone who I have only known through Twitter, which is, can be good sometimes, but who I've been very excited to talk to. And I have a huge long list, so we're probably not going to get all the way through. But thank you for joining me.
Yeah. Yes, an echo of the thanks. I actually have no idea how this even happened. This is like a weird dream that I'm having. So this is great. I told Alix that when she sent over her list of questions, I was like, okay, but just so you know, I can discuss the vast majority of your work off the cuff because I am your target demographic. So here we are.
But I do think that they gave me like mute and video power, so I can't just turn you off if you say too many nice things about. So just tread lightly,
Yeah, okay. All right.
What I thought we should talk about first, because
Yes.
this is the thing we write about, which is magic. And one of the things I think is particularly interesting is how you make magic feel magical, particularly when your work, which yours is so grounded in the real world. Like it feels the familiar world. We know all these words and places, and particularly yours is contemporary setting. How do you still make it feel like, ooh, it's magic?
What a good question. I think that ultimately I'm not that interested in second world fantasies. I just think that there is it's hard to feel rooted in something where I understand the wanting to get invested in another world. Like I think that when I was first falling in love with the genre, that was what drew me to it, was the escapism. And like I was the kind of kid who my mom like never wanted to let me out of the house, and so it's like, well, I guess it's all these books then. And but now that I have been in the world, thankfully, and experienced things, and I'm just a lot more interested in being sort of a mirror of what is actually around me. And I think that when it comes to magic, I'm also not that interested in knowing how things work. Like I only need to know how things work compared to other things. Like I think when I was working with the magic in the Atlas Six, and a lot of it is based around science and is in fact science and not even magic, and just like the magic part is the extension of how much science we can do and how much we can prove. It was just that I wanted it to have an element of sweat. I wanted it to feel like I compare the magical specialties to being in the Olympics, for example, where like, okay, so you have this thing that comes naturally to you. You could potentially switch and do a completely different magical thing, but it would be just as difficult as trying to go from ski jumping to gymnastics, where like you could very easily kill yourself trying. And like, to me, that's the extent of what I need to know. Like, how hard is this thing to do for this person versus the average population?
That's completely right. That's why your books feel magical. You win. You get an A on this question. But I think, that satisfies my personal rule, which is true mostly in what I read, but also what I write, which is vibes over rules every time. Like, I never want logic to get in the way of a good story. I'm not there for that. Like, I'm so sorry to go on this tangent, but I am a person who deeply loves The Last Jedi, which those are fantasy, just so that we all know those are space wizards. And I don't know if everyone is as steeped in this as I am, but there's a moment when a spaceship gets sliced in half by another spaceship and it all goes silent, and it's very, very cool. And a lot of people were like very hung up on whether that was possible. And I just felt like I had not met my fellow man. I was like, I don't understand. That was so cool. Like, I don't care if it was possible. Which I think, admittedly, in different, depending on what you're writing, like yours, I think maps so well onto dark academia, which we'll get into in a minute as an aesthetic and a genre, that the idea of the element of sweat and labor, I think fits very, very, like that works so well in world. The ones that I just wrote were novellas that are just fairy tale retellings, and they're very like, they're short and they're light and
oh yeah, sure, they're just fairy tale retellings. Never mind that you navigate the multiverse, which is part of this question too. Like, how did you decide that you were going to make the multiverse work, and then you pulled back on making it, like, overcomplicating it? Because for those books, it's the power of the narrative is what is controlling the multiverse. So how did you make that work without doing like the gross stuff?
Yeah, well, I started for like 10 seconds. I was like, what if I tried really hard? And I read about multiverse theory, and I asked my brothers, who are both engineers, like, what if I just like tried for a minute? And then I looked at it and I was like, nope, not for me, incorrect. And so I just made up my own little rules. I had like 3 things that had to happen. And then immediately broke them, because like one of the first things I was drafting, and I had like one character get stepped into another dimension, as happens, and she immediately texts her best friends. And I had like a minute of like, can you text someone like in the multiverse? Like, if you're in another dimension, can you text your friend? And then I was like, I don't ever need to think about that again. And I put it away, and I let her text her best friend the whole time.
You know what I would have loved though is if she had come back to like an enormous bill that just like actually, if that had happened in the Atlas 6 universe, there would have been a bill. I think that I'm working with the world, because the world as it is already so dystopian, that I just like, absolutely, you would have like roaming fees. That's just like, sure, it can work, but we're charging you for it.
But it's gonna suck also. It's not great. Yeah.
You're not gonna like that you did this.
I also feel like one of the things when you're doing like fairy tale stuff is you get to cheat and just like rely on everyone's pre-existing knowledge so much that I didn't. Like, I can just say like a fairy tale castle, and everyone sees it in their head. And so I didn't really have to bog down too much in like, this is the world and this is the introduction, which I think is what makes it fun to do what you were saying, and sort of like add your fantasy into the existing world rather than like invent.
There is technically a second world in the Atlas universe, which are the dream realms, but I built them off of Carl Jung has this theory that all of humanity is connected by this collective subconscious. And I was like, there it is. It's science now. So just that idea that like we are all cerebrally occupying the same space where time doesn't matter. Done.
Your world is built.
Absolutely flawless. So,
Yeah, well, actually, when I have to do a secondary world so far, and I say this as someone who's just like, I'm gonna write a secondary world novel next, which is horrible. It's so hard. So far, what I've done is just steal from other novels and worlds that I have that were formative to me, and just get away with that being a reference.
but that's what everybody is doing. I actually, the first time that I heard someone talking about Game of Thrones, someone was describing a plot point, and I was like, oh, are you talking about the princes in the tower? And they're like, what? And I was like, the Cousins War? And they're like, what? And I had to explain history to them because they were like, you just spoiled parts of Game of Thrones. So anyway.
And you were like, so did Wiki. I don't know what to do for you.
So yeah.
Moving from magic to your academia magic. I am a huge sucker for the knowledge is power as a theme. And one of the things I love about fantasy is it can do things so literally.
Yes,
like knowledge
yeah.
is power.
It is.
It is. I'm fascinated by it and I love it. And I love a good research book. But I have struggled in my own work to make research and like learning and the gaining of knowledge and going to class at all exciting. Like how do you write fast-paced thrillers about learning?
Okay, so I feel like one thing that I need to make clear about myself is that I went to law school, which is the worst kind of academia, I think, because it's occupied by like the worst kind of people. And I say that with all the love in my heart.
That's a steep competition.
Okay, what's happening? Okay, can't do anything about that. So yeah, because everyone who goes to law school was the top of their class. They are ambitious and obnoxious and they love the sound of their own voice. I'm including myself in this. You get off on this like power of being in this room, and all of academia is basically like a simulation of the real world. And it's just like, and you feel extra powerful. So before I went to law school, I was an urban planning major. And in the social sciences, we are busy imaginatively fixing the world. Like we're, across the aisle thinking and like creative problem solving and being part of the community is like, that's how you get a good grade, which is basically reinventing the world. It's just like
play acting community.
Yes, yeah, and you have this like godlike power. They'll ask questions like, how do we solve the economic depression in this one area, or like, how do we solve food deserts? And you're like, easy. Here's 10 pages, done. And then so you take that and put it in law school, and where again the worst, and again I'm saying this as fondly as possible, the worst human beings I've ever met in my life. And put us in a room where we are competing with each other in front of an audience, and like it's graded on a curve, so someone will always win and someone will always fail, no matter how smart the room is. And I think that's where, and that plus the awareness that like none of your institutions actually care about you, the individual. I once took an art history class. I have no idea if this story is true because it's so anecdotal, but I love it anyway, that Andy Warhol, I guess, whatever college he was attending at the time, he went in before they had started doing student ID numbers, and he went in and I was like, I'm Andy Warhol and I need to change my classes. And they were like, Andy Warhol, you have a number now. And he was like, can't you, but like, you know who I am, just look me up, just like, we know each other. And they're like, no, you can't do this without an ID number. And he was so mad that he went home and made that first like Campbell soup print to be like, we're all the same. And it was supposed to be this comment on what was happening to society. And I think about the darkness there all the time, the sense that your institutions don't care who you are. And so when I was in college, I sat as like one of the students on an admissions board. So I helped decide who should get scholarships. And this is a fascinating,
that's bleak. Yeah.
It's very bleak because it's not who deserves it the most. It's this weird game of like, who is actually going to take it? Because like our department can only like, if we offer this scholarship and then I remember this very talented, intelligent girl who was likely to go to Harvard or Yale instead. They were like, well, we can't give it to her even if she deserves it the most because she's not going to take it, or like she's not a sure enough bet. And we need to make sure we give it to someone who's going to be a return on our investment, that they're going to be like active, an active member of the student populace, and they're going to like really be part of this. And then when I was in law school, I was on the like student board, I was treasurer or whatever. And even then I would notice like the dean didn't know who I am. And so I take all of this and it becomes just immediately more than the books, and it becomes more about the ego of like what we're doing here is inherently important, even though really all we're doing is play acting at saving the world.
Yes.
And I think that like that the disintegration of that is what kind of adds to that thriller idea, because I think that it's very easy. You take this ego that academia builds up, and you're in this very claustrophobic environment where your ethics are compromised because you now live by like the university and that whatever, it's got its own ecosystem, its own rules. And I think that's how you get plots like The Secret History, where it's like, we're gonna have a bacchanal, and it's fine because the actual world exists outside of here.
Yeah, it's that we're super special and we're in this separate group, and the real world rules don't apply. We're in fake world rules for sure. I love too that like everything you just said is sort of like what makes the interpersonal internal dynamics of academic groups so toxic. I'm sorry, I'm getting like a lot of, I don't know if other people are talking on the Zoom. I'm so sorry. But it's also true that like the institutions themselves, not only do they not care about their students, but they are incredibly toxic, like to the world, they're institutions of power and empire. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to try and see if I can fix this.
Yeah.
Let me seek. I don't think I have the power to turn off Cinema Salem sound, but
yeah. Okay. Well,
there,
I think lots of people are asking. So okay. Anyway, I have absolutely no idea what we were talking about.
We were talking about how the real darkness of academia is academia itself. Maybe it's just our own feedback that's making this sound. Anyway. So I wonder too, like, I feel like dark academia is not something that I had heard as a phrase until maybe, I don't know, a year or two ago.
Yeah, it was like a label that was put on my book, not something that I thought I was writing.
And it's more, and I don't feel like I would call it a genre, but it's like an aesthetic. Like it's a certain aesthetic, and sometimes I find myself a little prickly about it, because if we're doing, I don't know, some sort of like Ivy League upper crust dark interpersonal thing just as the aesthetic, and you're never actually interrogating the institution itself or the power dynamics of the world, then I find myself very dissatisfied. Then I'm like, no, this is a Pinterest board. This is not dark academia.
Yeah. And I also think that although a lot of people misuse it, I think that there has to be an element of psychological thriller. That is what this is built on. I would call dark academia a subgenre of thriller, actually. And then it just happens to work really well in a fantasy setting, and people connect it with fantasy because boarding school books, which are a different thing, tend to create
overlapping. Have you read Babel yet? Have you read Rebecca Kwong's?
I haven't. No, she wasn't someone whose book I could like get, so I have to just wait like a normal person until I have time.
It's terrible.
I know.
Whenever that happens to me, like I got turned down for like an ARC request on NetGalley recently, and I felt very much like the Pretty Woman scene, like big mistake. I could have tweeted about it, like what was I gonna do?
Right. I mean, you could have, and everyone would have been so embarrassed. You should just do it now anyway, just for
no. Actually, since we're talking about dark psychological thrillers, one of the things I want to ask you about, which is difficult to ask because I know you've gotten it before. I would guess anyone who presents as a woman and who writes women characters gets the question about, you write such strong female characters. Tell me about that.
I think that I had this sort of crisis early on where I was like, I want to satisfy this craving, right? We want to see good, real female characters. We want to see, unlikable heroines. And how do we do that? And I eventually just decided you just have to put more women in. Like you just make a female cast, and like that's pretty much how you solve the problem, because the real world has lots of women in it, and so should your world. And I think that if you're looking around at the world and there are 5 men and 1 woman, then like you're probably a man, A, and B, like you're not looking at the world, and the mirror you're holding up is not, it's not working.
Do you find, though, I'm curious, because I would say, like, since you have a large female cat, like there's many different types of girls, do you feel like your reader responses vary? Many of your characters are, let's say, morally complicated. Do you feel like you get different responses for your morally
full-on compromise? Yeah. One thing that I love is one of my characters, Libby Rhodes. She's very archetypal for a reason. I wanted to use her as someone who felt very familiar, like she could be you, or she's someone you actually know, so that when we follow her journey, her choices make sense. And I want to compare her to Zinnia Gray because I have thoughts on that, but I just wanted to add that a lot of people have called Libby Rhodes a self-insert, which is absurd. I'm not Libby Rhodes. But I can see why I think that is a fairly misogynistic comment in itself. It's just like every girl thinks she's this person. I find Libby Rhodes' morality very taxing, and I don't question myself nearly as much as she does. And if I were in this situation, I don't think I would ask this many questions.
Well, it's just, I mean, I don't know, I've written mostly girls as my characters at this point, and I didn't realize, maybe when I started out, sorry, I made my hair insane, how much there's no winning that game with a particular subset of the audience.
No, you're not winning that game.
Like if you write a morally upright, modest, good girl by every definition, then you're going to get comments like she's self-insert, she's wish fulfillment, she's a Mary Sue, she's too perfect or whatever. And if you write someone who's like crazy, morally complex, or like makes bad choices, then it's like, oh, they're not likable. Like I get the unlikable
I hate
one.
her. I don't know why. I just feel like
she just rubs me the wrong way, and I'm like, oh my god. Oh my god. And then meanwhile they'll have attached like personally to some like psychopath of a guy in the book, and that just makes me insane. And then once you realize, though, it's actually very freeing to realize that with certain audiences you're just not going to win, and so then you're like, oh, then I can just get to write girls the way I have been one and met them, which is messy, which is just a huge mess. And the other thing that I was thinking about is how much I feel like this like female characters and their likability is tied to the issue of agency, because like if you're writing in the real world or in the patriarchal recognizable secondary world, like your girls' choices and their degree of agency is going to be limited. And so like with limited agency, I think you often kind of run into the reader response or the feeling that they're passive characters, that they're not doing enough, and that's because their choices are limited. But then to make them not a passive character and to make them active in this bad world, they often then have to break the rules, right? Either the social norms or the actual laws. So like then they're bad. So I don't know really what you want here. I think all the time of that tweet that was like, I support women's rights, but I also support women's wrongs.
Yes. Yeah, I think that it's super important to remove the like, I have to personally like these characters. For me as a writer, I don't need to like them. I just need to find their choices interesting. And I think that one of the easiest ways to do that is to yeah, people like a female character to have like a good amount of limits though. Like they shouldn't be arrogant. People hate when female characters are arrogant. They shouldn't be too ambitious. Like if they are ambitious, it's got to be in a girl boss kind of way. We can't actually like commit wrongs. And then the reason I wanted to talk about Libby Rhodes and Zinnia, because there's a difference between self-righteous. Well, there's like a fine line between self-righteous and selfish. And like self-righteous because I'm doing things that are built on this like system of ethics that I have learned and the audience has learned. And there's this sort of, acknowledgement of the fourth wall. Like for me, when I'm writing, that's just like, yeah, okay, we're following the rules because everyone reading this knows the rules and they expect these behaviors. And so in that sense, I have perhaps made Libby intentionally a bit more frustrating than Zinnia, who I think that she is a very selfish character in a way that makes a lot of sense, but it's clearly an important weakness that like a lot of what gets in her way is her understanding of the world, how the world should look like, how the world should look and what it should be like for her. And it was just very amusing for me. I was like, God, I'd love for her to meet Libby Rhodes and like,
yeah, for sure.
I'd love for these two to have a talk.
Or just like, I think those two things can actually go together pretty well sometimes. Like I think people can do very self-righteous things and act in upright ways, like they're doing this good in the world for ultimately very selfish reasons. Like,
yeah,
because it's the only thing propping up their fragile ego. Like,
and I don't even think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. I find it so confusing when characters don't act in a self-interested way. Like I always bring it back to Alina and the Grishaverse. I don't understand why she makes the choices she makes, because she's an orphan that no one has ever believed in, that no one has ever cared about, that has basically been useless her whole life. And then she gets this power and she's like, no, I shouldn't use it. I just want to go back to being my normal self. I'm like, why?
It's a classic of the genre though. So many fantasy heroes and they get their superpowers and they're like, oh.
I would rather have a quiet life. And I get why you have to do that for YA. Like you have to teach the teenagers who, like, my husband is a high school teacher and he likes to remind me that at a certain age, all teenagers are psychopaths. And like, so we have to teach them that you have to care about the world. But from the perspective of reading it as an adult, it's just like, but why do you care about the world? Do you really care about the world? And I think that's where the strong female character comes in, because she's like, no.
It turns out they're a little bit psychopaths, and that's fair. That's valid. That's accurate to my experience. Okay, I'm not gonna use up all our time, but so you said that Libby was an archetype. You play with a lot of archetypes for characters and tropes that are not like, and I'm not saying this in a like your book is a series of tropes kind of a way. It's just like there's these recognizable elements that I think makes reading a story really, really fun, because you're like, oh, okay, magical secret society, got it. Mysterious wizard figure, excellent. Tell me more. Oh, is there a battle to the death? Excellent. Like I just feel like I love seeing the ways that these pieces are fit together in new ways. Were you conscious of that when you were writing, and like how do you feel about the use of tropes in general?
T.L. Huchu called my book he was like, it's like you've written a cozy country house mystery, but made it not cozy or something like that. And I was like, thank you.
Do you know what it actually reminds me of more than anything? Which is
what?
The Library at Mount Char.
Oh my God, but that book is genius.
That book is so good, and yours is so good, but I think of that one actually as like a little bit unclassifiable, but it does have recocugnized tropes in it.
That's
like there are pieces where you're like, I know this, I know where we are. Oh, no, I don't, not anymore. And I love that.
That's one of those books. I can't say I've had too many reading experiences that have knocked the wind out of me, and that is one of them for sure. But no, I actually think I didn't query the Atlas 6 because I felt like the elements were too derivative, that it was just like, if I were to explain it in a pitch, I would just be repeating a lot of things that had happened before. And not that
that's
like
all
to
books
me,
that are published.
Yeah, well, right. Correct. But like, out in the war zone of trying to get an agent, I was like, this book is not going to stand out because you have to get invested in the characters. which, you know, I think that what is unconventional about it is that the characters are the plot and there is no objective truth, and you kind of have to take an active role as the reader and decide who is telling the truth, if anyone, what is really happening here, which is also how I felt in law school. But yeah, no, I think, and it also comes from a place of just being, I started as a fan fiction writer, and my goal, I'm never gonna be Hugo Award winning Olivie Blake. It's not gonna happen. I'm crowd pleasing.
Oh man, somebody had better be recording this so we can play this back over when you win a Hugo.
No. I was actually just looking over the Hugo list, which of course you were on, as deservedly so. And I was just like, I'm not gonna end up here. And that's fine. Like, because I think more than trying to do something different, I am just trying to create that feeling of satisfaction. Like, to me, the best thing that you can do after finishing a book is feel like that's exactly what I wanted to eat, you know, like that's just like, that hit the spot, and that's what I'm trying to do more than anything.
Well, but
so
okay.
I think that's why
I do think that is something that flourishes in the fan fiction world, but I also genuinely believe that some of those modes of writing and those sort of tonal tools are starting to leak into the more mainstream of sci-fi and fantasy in ways that I really like. Shelley Parker Chan I've heard her call it id fic. It's like chasing your id, like you're just following it wherever it leads you in the plot.
Yeah.
And I mean, they just won the Astounding Award for Best New Writer, and that's a Hugo. So I'm just saying, like,
yeah,
like,
well, that makes sense to me.
Those tropes, chasing like that sense of satisfaction and story satisfaction, I think is a really sort of like interior first, emotions first approach to writing that is exciting and interesting. I like it.
Yeah, and there's also like, I mean, I think there's a fine line. I think that a lot of people who are identifying tropes are maybe not equipped to do so. You know, speaking of Twitter, just every now and then, I think that certain aspects have become so consumable that people are failing to understand what actually is or isn't. Well, and kind of when we're talking about dark academia too, I think there is a difference between dark academia, the aesthetic, and dark academia, the actual subgenre. And I think that, so on the one hand, it's really nice that we can identify these tropes, which is something that literary critics have been doing forever. And now we have sort of taught an audience how to look for those things and how to chase their id. But also, yeah, they've become very marketable too, which is dangerous in a dystopian way.
I mean, whenever you are in publishing world, things are always at that awkward intersection of like art and capital. And so like there's something that's like, oh, this is fun. This is like an interesting way to talk. Oh, it's marketing now. Like, it's a very short slide down the hill. No, but also I get a little defensive. Sometimes I see people being like, don't reduce your book to just a list of tropes. And I understand that, but almost always, if you Google it, there's going to be cover copy that will tell you more. If you need
yes, exactly. Or just even like how the Library of Congress breaks it down. It's like, it's all right there.
Yeah, we've done this.
I wrote this in our let's call them notes, when really I think I was just sort of yelling at you without punctuation. When I read The 10,000 Doors of January, and when it debuted, that great cover, and I just opened it up and just fell right into that narrative voice. It's just like, so memorable. It's so good. The thing with the letters, and I just loved it so much. And I was like, but this is a portal fantasy. Like right away, I was like, that's what this is. And it's still, it felt to me like it was an evolution of that genre, that subgenre, in a way that was so, like that's one of those openings that just stays with you, because even though it's like, we've done this before, we have never been this before. And so I just wanted to contribute that also, because
I never feel like I'm doing anything new. I'm just like, I'm just going to slowly move through all of the books and genres that were formative to me as a child. That's like what I'm doing here.
I think that your voice is like the adult voice of Patricia C. Reed. Well, I mean, she is an adult, but like, I remember reading Dealing with Dragons. I just
finished reading all those out loud to my kids, actually.
And if you had written an adult version of Dealing with Dragons, I think it would just be an evolution of that. So if you need a project or Ella Enchanted, like that is what your work
Yeah,
feels
I did
like
a lot
to
of
me.
Gail Carson Levine. I did a
Yeah.
ton of Robin McKinley. So much Robin McKinley. That was really the formative stuff.
Yeah.
Before we run out of time, I
Oh.
see one thing in the Q&A, and then I have a couple more questions. So the Q&A
I'm glad you're
is
keeping track of this because I'm such a prima donna when it comes to these. I'm like, I will not look at the Q&A. I'm busy vibing.
Alex, you were an adjunct, and Olivie, you were in law school. As people have made the transition into writing fiction, did you ever feel difficulty in swapping those two brain modes? And if so, any good tips on how to make it feel less like sandpaper in the brain? Somebody out there is transitioning from academia to writing fiction, and I support you.
First of all, I was not good at law school. My brain couldn't do law school like right away. And it was so hard for me too, to go from being like, was at the top of my class in college where we had to think creatively. And then you go to law school and they reprogram your brain. And I could not do it because there is no such thing as creative problem solving in law school. You fit within a box and I couldn't do it. So now I write books.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was an adjunct. Like I was not a rising star in the academic history world. I really enjoyed graduate school a lot. It was I would say that writing a history thesis is like pretty good practice for writing a novel. It's basically assembling an argument out of like disparate facts. You're like, listen, this looks like nothing, but let me convince you that I've actually seen a narrative track all the way through. So I didn't find it a huge transition. And it was also for me financially one of those situations where people are like, ooh, I don't know if you should quit your day job. And they are thinking about a particular kind of day job when they say that has like benefits and like a living
Right.
wage. But I had spent most of my adult life right at or below the poverty line. So I was like, this is great. I can quit my day job anytime. Yeah, so that was not helpful advice, but that is how it was for us. I know that there's going to be live audience questions too, and I'll give space for that. But I do want to ask if you've been reading anything good first. That's one of my favorite questions.
Oh God, unfortunately, the first thing that popped in my head was bad. Not that it was bad. I read a book that
I'm gonna email you after this today.
I was so hyped for it because historical romances and thrillers are like, those are my desserts. I like to save them for because those are the ones where I don't want to put them down. I just want to consume them in one sitting. And so I saved them. And there was this one thriller I was so excited about. And then nowhere in the marketing did they say that it was not a sequel, but it was in world. And so when I got to the end, I was like, I have so many more questions. And then I realized there was like another book, but now I can't read that book because I have the answer to half my questions.
That's very frustrating. That's very frustrating.
Yeah, and I'm so mad. And I neglected my child a little bit to finish it. Not really, but he gets really worked up when he doesn't have my eye contact. And I was like, Mommy just needs to read 5% more. But no, right now I'm reading Angelica Frankenstein Makes Her Match, which is by Sally Thorne. I feel like Sally Thorne is a lot weirder than The Hating Game. And in the best way. I like all my books to have a little element of weird, and the thing that she's best known for is pretty normal, and I would love to see her get weirder. It's kind of a weird book already, so yeah. Awesome. But I was thinking as I was reading it that it's the kind of content that I would love to see you do also. I have not yet put a brand to what that is, but that's yeah. What about you? What are you reading?
A lot of boring nonfiction stuff. I did hit some historical romances pretty hard actually last week. We all got a cold in the house and I was like, haha, I'm wrapping it up. But one of the last things that I read, and I just reread actually, I loved it so much, is Nicola Griffith's Spear. Nicola Griffith is one of these writers that has been formative, important to me since I was 13. I think I read her first book.
Oh, God.
It just hit me like a ton of bricks. And her writing, I think, is just unbelievably good and clear and sharp, and she has become an expert in medievalism in a way that is hard to explain. Hild is her big book. Hild is her big one's obviously medieval.
Oh yes, great cover, love that font.
Oh, it's gorgeous, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So when I say that she knows her stuff, she became fluent in like 3 different languages to write this, and the different characters only use verbs that have roots in the language they would have spoken. So there's like Celtic word roots and Latinate roots in different
See,
sections.
I
Like,
feel like that should be science fiction.
it's so smart. Well, there's actually no magic
It
in
should
it,
be
which is
no,
it's very interesting.
it's like linguistics as a science fiction.
Yes,
Like
yes.
I feel like we should apply hard science to more things.
I actually support that. No, so she's got all this experience, right? But none of it has ever been Arthurian, and it's actually just over the line of being a novella to a book, I think. So it's a book, but this is her first Arthurian thing, and it's like a retelling of Peritor, one of the Knights of the Round Table, but it's gender flipped and it's very, very queer, and it's just so magical feeling. I loved it so much.
That's on my list because I am attracted to things that are Arthurian.
Yeah, well, and I mean, there's been a lot, and I will consume a YA King Arthur retail. Like, I'm open to this is a wide field that everyone should be in, but like someone with this depth of knowledge doing Arthurian is just like so satisfying to me. I really had an amazing time. And I think there's no audience questions, so I'm allowed to just wrap up, I believe. The last thing is, what are you working on? What can we expect next from you?
Well, I recently wrapped the 3rd Atlas. So the Atlas trilogy is technically complete. And then my next book after that is basically, it's for some reason, my editor specifically wanted me to write a family drama. So it's a family drama, and it's what I'm calling, well, it's called Gifted and Talented, and it's about the prodigy to clinical depression pipeline, but with hot magic nerds. Yeah. But aren't you doing a dark academia book or an academia book?
I'm not. No, I have friends who've dabbled. No, my next thing that's going to be coming out is a ways away still, but it's the next full-length novel, and it's like a Southern Gothic.
Oh, well,
because
yes.
I don't sound lit, I realize, but I am from Kentucky, grew up there my whole life.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like a upper Southern Gothic, Kentucky Gothic, we could call it, and a little bit Beauty and the Beast bones in there.
I accept. One of my favorite books is Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil.
Oh, yeah.
I really love that Southern like touch to it. And I haven't read one that's been quite satisfying enough, but I trust you.
If you ever want Southern Gothic recommendations, I mean, the only person who I believe like deserves to own the genre right now is Jesmyn Ward. Everything that she has written is flawless and perfect.
That's true. I have read one of hers, so yeah. Fair.
Well, it's been absolutely wonderful. Let me check. I think there might be one more thing in the Q&A. No, I think we're all good. So I think I'm gonna turn off my little screen, but thank you so much. This has been a huge pleasure.
Yes, this is great. I wish we could have had more time, like several more hours, but I guess we'll just have to become even noisier friends on Twitter.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.